Ladies and gentlemen, the truth about attraction is often more complicated than we'd like to admit. We often think that attraction is simply a matter of physical appeal or charming words, but it's far more profound. At the deepest level, attraction involves psychology, boundaries, and challenge. Let us first acknowledge the dynamics of attraction, something that runs far deeper than mere physical appearance. Attraction, you see, is driven by psychological forces. It's a complex dance between two people who are navigating the territories of power, vulnerability, and independence. When a woman detaches, when she defines herself clearly and maintains her own sense of self, it is this very autonomy that often makes her irresistibly attractive. Why? Because detachment signals something crucial: boundaries. We live in a world where boundaries are frequently blurred, where emotional availability is mistaken for intimacy, and where individuals sacrifice their own well-being for the sake of connection. But true detachment shows that a person values their own integrity above all else. This is not about avoidance, it's about self-respect. A woman who detaches is not running away, she's standing her ground. And this is something deeply respected in the psychological and evolutionary landscape of human nature. And then there's the challenge. We often mistake the deepest connections for simple availability, but the truth is, men often find themselves drawn to what they cannot easily possess. The act of detaching isn't a rejection, it's a signal that what's desired must be earned. And in this challenge, the man is driven to prove his worth not just through words, but through actions, effort, and emotional maturity. Think about the masculine archetype. What is it that drives a man? Strength, control, the ability to rise to a challenge. A man cannot resist a woman who presents that challenge, not because of games or manipulations, but because in his very DNA, he is wired to respond to that which is not immediately accessible. This is not about playing games, it's about recognizing the strength of an individual who knows their worth and refuses to compromise it. Lastly, we must look to the evolutionary psychology of human beings. For thousands of years, our ancestors lived in a world of competition and survival. The most coveted mates were those who could maintain their own autonomy, not those who were easily won. Detachment, in the context of evolutionary psychology, signifies strength and independence. It speaks to a deeper instinct in men, the desire to win over what is hard to attain, to conquer what is worthy of conquest. And this is why, paradoxically, detachment is so magnetic. Attraction between men and women is an intricate, deeply psychological phenomenon that extends far beyond the surface-level physical realm. When we examine attraction, we are often caught in the superficial cultural narratives about what is attractive. Society tends to focus on things like physical appearance, charm, or external displays of interest. But these external attributes only skim the surface of a much more profound psychological reality that governs human connection. To truly understand attraction, we must look at it through the lens of human psychology and the way it shapes interpersonal dynamics. Attraction is not merely an immediate, fleeting feeling based on looks or charm. It is something that forms over time within the context of behavior, self-worth, boundaries, and psychological signaling. As much as we like to believe that attraction is spontaneous and driven by factors we consciously control, it is often governed by unconscious drives deeply rooted in our evolutionary biology, cultural conditioning, and personal experiences. One of the most powerful elements that affect attraction is the dynamic between power and vulnerability. When a man is drawn to a woman, it's often not because she simply meets a list of desirable traits or is available at all times. It's the psychological perception of her as someone with strength, autonomy, and independence that draws him in. This is where detachment becomes incredibly powerful. A woman who detaches from a man, not out of malice, but from a place of self-respect and self-sufficiency, creates a psychological space in which the man begins to perceive her as something of value, something worth pursuing. Detachment is not a sign of disinterest or rejection. Rather, it signals that a woman has a life of her own, with interests, passions, and boundaries that are not defined solely by the man or the relationship. This autonomy is attractive because it reflects self-confidence, personal integrity, and the capacity to maintain one's identity in the face of romantic involvement. It tells the man that she is not just available for him, but that her attention is something to be earned. In a sense, her detachment becomes an invitation to the man to step up, to meet her on her level, and to prove his worth not through grand gestures or desperate measures, but through sustained effort, respect, and emotional maturity. From a psychological standpoint, detachment is an act of strength and resilience. It implies that a person is emotionally stable and does not depend on external validation or approval to define their sense of self-worth. This is not only attractive to men, but it also aligns with core psychological principles of self-determination and autonomy, which are central to human motivation. When a person exhibits emotional independence, they project a sense of control over their own life, which is inherently appealing. It creates a sense of mystery and intrigue because the individual is not constantly seeking attention, approval, or validation from others. In turn, this can stir a man's innate desire to win her affection, not because she is easy to get, but because she represents a challenge that requires him to rise to the occasion. The detachment dynamic also speaks to the power of boundaries. In modern relationships, there is often an assumption that closeness equals submission, and that in order to connect with someone, we must give up pieces of ourselves. But true closeness, real connection, is only possible when both individuals retain their individual identity and honor their boundaries. This is where detachment comes into play as an expression of emotional health. A woman who detaches doesn't necessarily distance herself from her partner, she simply maintains a clear sense of her own boundaries, making it clear that her sense of self cannot be compromised. This reinforces respect in the relationship and forces both parties to engage from a position of equality, not neediness or dependency. This is where the role of challenge becomes evident in the attraction dynamic. The concept of challenge is deeply embedded in human relationships. Men, like women, are not simply drawn to others because they are easily accessible. There is a deeply ingrained psychological drive for challenge, for conquest, and for the feeling that they must strive for something worthy of their time and effort. When a woman is emotionally detached, she creates that challenge. She is not immediately available, and this lack of emotional availability is precisely what triggers the male desire to win her over. This is not a superficial game, but rather a reflection of a deeper psychological truth. We are drawn to that which we cannot immediately possess, and this dynamic sparks a deeper level of engagement. For men, there is an unconscious desire to prove their worth, to demonstrate that they are capable of winning over someone who is not simply giving themselves away. When faced with detachment, a man is prompted to reflect on his own emotional strength, his own capacity for persistence and emotional investment. This process pushes him to evolve, to become more than what he was before. This challenge isn't about playing games, it's about confronting and overcoming personal limits in the context of relational dynamics. In this sense, the dynamic of attraction is a dance where both individuals maintain their autonomy, their boundaries, and their sense of self-worth while also engaging in a process of mutual pursuit. The woman, by detaching, invites the man to rise to the occasion. The man, by pursuing, reveals his emotional depth and his capacity to meet her challenge. This interaction is complex yet deeply satisfying because it allows both individuals to connect not from a place of desperation, but from a place of mutual respect and self-empowerment. The psychological intricacies of this dynamic demonstrate that attraction isn't a matter of simple physical appearance or availability. Rather, it is rooted in the deeper workings of human behavior, the way we perceive ourselves and others, and the boundaries we set in our relationships. When one person remains emotionally detached, neither seeking constant validation nor giving up their identity, they set the stage for a deeper, more profound connection. The dynamics of attraction, therefore, are not just about pulling people closer, they are about creating a space where both individuals can maintain their strength, challenge one another, and grow together, not through dependency, but through mutual respect. Boundaries are an essential aspect of human psychology, particularly in relationships. They serve as an invisible yet powerful framework that defines who we are, what we stand for, and how we interact with others. In the context of attraction and interpersonal relationships, boundaries are often underestimated or misunderstood, yet they play a pivotal role in shaping the dynamics between individuals. Boundaries are not just about saying no or maintaining distance. They are a reflection of self-respect, personal integrity, and emotional health. They signify that an individual knows who they are, understands their needs, and is unwilling to compromise these for the sake of others' expectations or desires. In the context of romantic attraction, boundaries are particularly significant because they act as a form of self-preservation and a means of maintaining emotional stability. Many people enter relationships with the unspoken belief that vulnerability equates to closeness, and that letting go of personal limits will lead to deeper intimacy. But in reality, true intimacy is built on mutual respect, which can only be achieved when both individuals retain their sense of self. This is where boundaries come into play. They allow people to preserve their identity while still engaging meaningfully with others. The psychological significance of boundaries lies in their ability to protect emotional well-being while fostering healthy, sustainable connections. The first and perhaps most fundamental psychological role that boundaries serve is in the establishment of self-respect. Boundaries are essentially an assertion of the self, the declaration that one's emotional, physical, and psychological needs must be acknowledged and respected by others. Without boundaries, we lose our ability to define ourselves and we become susceptible to the demands, desires, and expectations of others. This is especially important in the context of romantic relationships, where the temptation to merge with another person can sometimes lead to the erosion of one's sense of self. A lack of boundaries creates an environment where one person's needs always take precedence over the others, leading to an unhealthy imbalance and a lack of genuine connection. Boundaries help maintain a sense of individuality. They signal to others that one's sense of identity is not for sale, and that emotional stability is tied to the ability to retain this individuality. When we allow our boundaries to be violated, whether intentionally or unintentionally, we begin to lose touch with who we are. This loss of self is particularly damaging in relationships because it breeds resentment, confusion, and a feeling of being unfulfilled. A woman who maintains strong emotional boundaries, for instance, does not allow herself to be completely swept up in a relationship at the expense of her own values, goals, or needs. This doesn't mean she is emotionally unavailable or distant, but rather that she values herself enough to ensure that her identity is not subsumed by the needs of another person. Boundaries also function as a mechanism for emotional regulation. Relationships are inherently complex and can bring up a range of emotions, positive and negative. It is all too easy to become overwhelmed by these emotions, to lose perspective, or to give in to emotional impulses that may not be in our best interest. Boundaries, however, provide the necessary space to process emotions and make thoughtful decisions. They act as a safeguard against impulsive reactions, preventing us from engaging in unhealthy patterns of behavior such as overattachment or emotional dependency. By maintaining clear boundaries, we ensure that we do not lose control over our emotional responses and that we retain the capacity to respond to others from a place of emotional clarity and stability. From a psychological perspective, boundaries also promote healthier and more balanced interactions. They prevent people from becoming enmeshed in one another's emotional worlds, which can lead to codependency. Codependency is a psychological pattern in which individuals become excessively reliant on each other for emotional support, validation, or a sense of self-worth. This pattern typically arises when boundaries are weak or non-existent, and it often results in one person sacrificing their own needs to fulfill the needs of the other. Over time, this imbalance breeds dissatisfaction and emotional fatigue as both parties feel increasingly drained by the relationship. A healthy relationship, however, is built on two individuals who respect one another's boundaries and who are able to engage in a way that allows each person to maintain their autonomy. In romantic relationships, the psychological significance of boundaries becomes especially pronounced when one person is perceived as emotionally available and the other is emotionally detached. When a person becomes too available, when they constantly seek validation, compromise their own needs, or let their partner's demands dictate their emotional state, they often erode the natural attraction that existed at the beginning of the relationship. On the other hand, when a person maintains their boundaries, it forces the relationship to operate on a more balanced, healthy level. This dynamic creates space for both partners to grow individually and together, and ensures that both individuals retain their sense of self-worth and dignity. From an evolutionary standpoint, boundaries can also be seen as a form of emotional self-preservation. Throughout human history, our ancestors lived in environments where personal survival was closely tied to the ability to manage emotional interactions. A person who could protect themselves emotionally by maintaining clear boundaries was better equipped to navigate the complexities of social relationships, including romantic ones. By keeping a level of emotional distance, individuals could safeguard themselves from unhealthy attachments or potential harm. Today, the same principle applies. Boundaries act as a psychological defense mechanism, ensuring that we do not become entangled in unhealthy, draining relationships that undermine our emotional well-being. The process of establishing and maintaining boundaries is not always straightforward. It often involves a combination of self-awareness, self-discipline, and assertiveness. Some individuals may struggle with setting boundaries because they fear rejection or conflict, or because they have not been taught how to assert themselves in relationships. However, learning to set healthy boundaries is a crucial step in fostering emotional resilience and self-esteem. As we grow more attuned to our own emotional needs and more comfortable with asserting those needs, we develop stronger psychological fortitude and healthier relationships. Boundaries also play a crucial role in fostering mutual respect in relationships. When both parties honor each other's limits, they demonstrate a deep understanding of one another's needs and values. This mutual respect strengthens the bond between them, creating a foundation of trust and emotional security. In relationships where boundaries are respected, individuals are more likely to feel safe and valued, leading to deeper emotional connections and a healthier dynamic overall. In sum, the psychological significance of boundaries cannot be overstated. They are not merely a tool for preventing conflict or ensuring emotional safety. They are a reflection of one's self-respect, emotional maturity, and ability to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics. Boundaries allow individuals to retain their identity, regulate their emotions, and engage in relationships that are healthy, balanced, and sustainable. In the context of romantic attraction, boundaries are one of the most powerful tools for maintaining emotional stability and ensuring that relationships are grounded in respect, autonomy, and mutual understanding. Vulnerability and challenge are often perceived as polar opposites. Vulnerability is seen as weakness, while challenge is understood as strength. However, in the context of relationships and human attraction, these two elements are deeply intertwined and essential to the dynamics that foster connection and growth. Vulnerability, contrary to popular belief, is not an admission of weakness, but a courageous willingness to expose one's emotional depth and authenticity. Challenge, on the other hand, represents the unconscious desire to overcome obstacles, to prove one's worth, and to grow as an individual within a relationship. Together, vulnerability and challenge form a complex yet powerful dynamic that shapes the way men and women relate to one another and the depth of their emotional connection. The concept of vulnerability is often misunderstood, particularly in modern Western society, which tends to value strength, independence, and emotional control. Vulnerability is traditionally viewed as the opposite of strength, and many individuals, particularly men, may avoid it for fear of being perceived as weak or incapable. However, vulnerability is a key aspect of human connection. It requires a person to open themselves up, to expose their inner world to another, and to take the risk of being emotionally hurt or rejected. But vulnerability is not about being weak or overly emotional. It is about embracing one's humanity, acknowledging the capacity for emotional depth, and allowing another person to witness it. In romantic relationships, vulnerability plays a crucial role in establishing genuine emotional intimacy. When a person allows themselves to be vulnerable, they signal to their partner that they are open to truly connecting, not just on a superficial level, but on a deeply personal one. The vulnerability of exposing one's fears, desires, and imperfections invites the other person to reciprocate, creating a space for mutual understanding and trust. It is through vulnerability that individuals communicate their real selves, unguarded and raw. This openness is what fosters authentic connection, because it allows both individuals to see beyond the surface level projections and connect with one another on a soul-deep level. However, vulnerability alone is not enough to sustain a meaningful relationship. It must be accompanied by challenge. In many ways, the human psyche craves challenge, especially in the context of romantic attraction. The challenge is what keeps the relationship dynamic, exciting, and engaging. Without challenge, the relationship risks stagnation, and the initial passion and attraction may fade. The challenge comes in many forms: emotional challenges, intellectual challenges, and even challenges to one's sense of self. But it is the interplay between vulnerability and challenge that creates the psychological and emotional energy necessary for a deeply satisfying and lasting connection. When we introduce challenge into the equation, it often ignites a primal instinct within both partners, the desire to prove oneself worthy, to rise to the occasion, and to conquer what initially feels difficult or unattainable. For men, this desire to prove themselves is deeply rooted in evolutionary psychology. Historically, men have been driven by the need to protect, provide, and demonstrate their strength and capabilities. A woman who presents a challenge, whether through emotional detachment, maintaining her boundaries, or requiring emotional investment, appeals to this instinct. The challenge is not about making the woman emotionally inaccessible, but rather about creating a dynamic in which the man feels the need to prove his worthiness through sustained effort, respect, and genuine connection. At the same time, women too are drawn to the challenge that a man presents. For women, the challenge can come in the form of emotional resilience, strength, and the ability to meet her on a deeper emotional level. When a man remains emotionally engaged but does not fully surrender to emotional dependence, it presents a challenge for the woman to engage with him on her terms. This dynamic forces both individuals to grow and evolve within the relationship. The vulnerability they share serves as the foundation, but the challenge ensures that neither person becomes complacent or takes the relationship for granted. One of the key ways in which vulnerability and challenge interact is through the development of mutual respect. Vulnerability allows both individuals to reveal their fears and desires, but challenge ensures that they respect one another's autonomy and emotional space. The challenge forces both partners to prove that they are worthy of one another's time, energy, and emotional investment. It is through overcoming challenges, both internal and external, that respect is solidified. The challenge, therefore, becomes a means of building trust, as each partner demonstrates their commitment to the relationship by showing resilience and emotional maturity in the face of obstacles. This interplay between vulnerability and challenge can be seen as a dance, a constant negotiation between openness and resilience, surrender and strength. The challenge is not about manipulation or creating unnecessary drama, but about encouraging growth and deeper connection. When both individuals are willing to take emotional risks, to expose their true selves, and to challenge each other to grow, the relationship becomes one of mutual empowerment. This is the essence of attraction in its most profound and meaningful form: two individuals who are not afraid to face the emotional complexities of their own psyches and who together create something greater than the sum of their parts. In relationships where vulnerability and challenge are in harmony, both partners experience a sense of fulfillment and emotional satisfaction that is rooted in personal growth and mutual respect. The challenge keeps the connection alive, while the vulnerability ensures that the relationship is grounded in authenticity and emotional depth. This combination fosters not only attraction but a lasting emotional bond that can withstand the inevitable trials that life presents. From a psychological standpoint, vulnerability and challenge are also important for the development of emotional resilience. By being vulnerable, individuals expose themselves to potential rejection or hurt. However, when they face these emotional risks with strength and courage, they build resilience. They learn that rejection is not a reflection of their worth, but a natural part of the human experience. Challenge, in turn, encourages individuals to push past their emotional limits, to confront their insecurities, and to develop a greater sense of emotional maturity. In this way, vulnerability and challenge are not just fundamental to romantic attraction, they are integral to the emotional development of each individual within the relationship. They create the conditions for growth, both as a couple and as individuals. It is through vulnerability that we invite connection, and it is through challenge that we ensure that connection remains dynamic, stimulating, and deeply rewarding. This balance between vulnerability and challenge is a crucial aspect of the psychological and emotional fabric that underpins all meaningful relationships. Without vulnerability, there can be no true connection. Without challenge, there can be no growth. Together, they form the foundation of attraction, emotional depth, and mutual respect, creating a relationship that is not only emotionally fulfilling but also transformative. Emotional control is often seen as a hallmark of masculine strength, a defining characteristic that sets men apart in their ability to handle life's challenges with poise, rationality, and resilience. Yet, this concept is frequently misunderstood. True emotional control is not about repressing or denying emotions, but about managing and channeling them in a way that enhances personal growth, facilitates healthy relationships, and promotes mental clarity. For men, emotional control is an essential skill, one that is deeply connected to their capacity to embody different masculine archetypes, traditional roles, or patterns of behavior that have been developed and passed down through generations. In many cultures, men are expected to adopt roles that align with particular archetypes: the warrior, the king, the magician, and the lover. These archetypes represent different aspects of masculinity, and each one carries with it a unique approach to emotional control. By understanding how emotional control interacts with these archetypes, men can develop a more nuanced and healthy approach to managing their emotions, while also cultivating the virtues associated with each archetype. The warrior archetype embodies strength, discipline, and a fierce drive for purpose. This archetype is associated with action, focus, and decisiveness. Warriors are often seen as the protectors and providers. People who take action in times of need, are prepared for battle, and face challenges head-on. However, the warrior must also practice emotional control to avoid being overwhelmed by aggression, rage, or impulsivity. Unchecked emotions in the warrior lead to destructive behavior, rash decisions, and a lack of discernment. Emotional control for the warrior means channeling raw emotions like anger and frustration into productive action. Rather than acting on impulse, a warrior takes a step back to assess the situation with calm deliberation. This ability to control his emotional responses allows him to lead with clarity and integrity, making strategic decisions even in high-pressure situations. The warrior archetype also teaches the value of resilience. In difficult moments, it is easy for emotions to overwhelm and cloud judgment. The warrior understands that emotional control doesn't mean suppression, but rather mastery over one's emotional state. A warrior who can manage his emotions with composure is able to inspire others and navigate life's battles without being governed by his impulses or fears. By embracing this archetype, men learn to act decisively and with purpose, staying true to their goals even when the path is fraught with challenges. In contrast to the warrior's physical and action-oriented strength, the king archetype represents the emotional and spiritual mastery that comes from wisdom, balance, and authority. Kings are not driven by the need to conquer or dominate, but by the need to protect, guide, and rule wisely. Emotional control in the king archetype involves the ability to regulate not just the more intense emotions of anger or frustration, but also the subtler feelings of pride, jealousy, and possessiveness. A king must govern himself first before he can govern others. This requires the ability to remain calm and composed in moments of emotional turmoil, as well as the wisdom to understand the deeper layers of his feelings. By exercising emotional control, the king maintains his inner peace and makes decisions that reflect his higher purpose and values. The king archetype also emphasizes emotional intelligence. Rather than reacting impulsively to stress or adversity, the king archetype teaches men to pause, reflect, and assess the emotional landscape of a situation before responding. In relationships, a king knows when to be compassionate, when to be firm, and when to step back. Emotional control allows the king to lead with patience, dignity, and fairness, inspiring respect and loyalty from those around him. The balance between authority and empathy is key for the king to rule wisely and maintain harmony in his kingdom, whether that kingdom is a family, a workplace, or a community. The magician archetype introduces another layer to emotional control, one that is focused on insight, creativity, and transformation. The magician represents the intellectual and spiritual dimension of masculinity, a man who uses his wisdom to navigate the complexities of life. He is not concerned with brute force or domination, but rather with understanding the world and harnessing his own internal resources to create positive change. Emotional control for the magician involves developing awareness of the inner emotional world and understanding how emotions can either hinder or enhance one's capacity for intellectual and spiritual growth. For the magician, emotional control is about detachment, not in the sense of disengagement, but in the sense of being able to observe one's emotions without becoming entangled in them. The magician understands that emotions are powerful forces, and while they cannot be ignored, they must not dictate his actions. This archetype teaches the importance of balance, where emotions are acknowledged but not allowed to cloud judgment or creativity. Emotional control for the magician means cultivating inner peace and mental clarity, which allows him to think deeply, solve problems creatively, and lead others through the power of insight and wisdom. The lover archetype represents passion, connection, and emotional depth. The lover is attuned to his own emotions and to the emotions of others. He values intimacy, vulnerability, and emotional connection in relationships. While the lover archetype is often seen as synonymous with intense emotional expression, it is just as much about emotional control. The lover must learn to balance his emotions, understanding that his passion and desire must be tempered by respect, empathy, and self-control. Without emotional regulation, the lover risks becoming consumed by his desires, unable to form healthy relationships, or falling prey to emotional volatility. For the lover, emotional control means understanding and respecting emotional boundaries, both his own and those of others. It involves learning how to express emotions in a way that fosters connection without overwhelming or suffocating others. The lover archetype teaches men to embrace their emotions fully, yet to act with emotional maturity and restraint. A man who embodies the lover archetype understands that true intimacy is not just about emotional expression, but also about emotional balance, knowing when to speak, when to listen, and when to give space. This balance ensures that relationships are built on mutual respect, love, and trust rather than emotional chaos. The relationship between emotional control and masculine archetypes is one of integration. Each archetype offers a unique approach to managing emotions, whether through the warrior's resilience, the king's wisdom, the magician's insight, or the lover's emotional depth. For men, emotional control is not about suppressing feelings, but about integrating emotional awareness with action, insight, and connection. A man who learns to embody these archetypes with emotional control becomes more self-aware, more resilient, and more capable of navigating the complexities of life and relationships. He is not at the mercy of his emotions, but is able to use them as powerful tools for growth, leadership, and connection. By embodying emotional control, men can unlock their fullest potential and become the kind of men who inspire respect, trust, and love in those around them. Human behavior is one of the most complex phenomena in nature, encompassing everything from our interactions with others to the ways we think, feel, and act in different circumstances. While much of human behavior is shaped by cultural and environmental factors, there is a significant body of research suggesting that many aspects of our behavior can be traced back to our evolutionary origins. Evolutionary psychology, a branch of psychology that studies how human behavior has been shaped by evolutionary forces, offers a lens through which we can understand why we do the things we do. It examines the ways in which our ancestral environment, survival strategies, and reproductive needs have influenced our psychological mechanisms, instincts, and behaviors. At the core of evolutionary psychology is the idea that the brain, like any other organ in the human body, evolved to solve problems that our ancestors faced in order to survive and reproduce. These problems could range from securing food and avoiding predators to finding a mate and ensuring the survival of offspring. Over the course of thousands of generations, humans developed psychological traits and behaviors that were advantageous for survival and reproduction. While the specific challenges humans face today may be vastly different from those our ancestors encountered, many of the mental processes that evolved to address those challenges remain deeply embedded in our psychology. One of the most fundamental aspects of evolutionary psychology is the idea of natural selection. According to Charles Darwin's theory, individuals who are better adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and pass on their genes to the next generation. Over time, the traits that help individuals survive and reproduce become more common in the population. This includes not only physical traits like strength or speed, but also psychological traits like problem-solving abilities, social bonding, and emotional regulation. These traits would have been advantageous for survival, whether it involves securing food, forming alliances, or navigating complex social dynamics. A central concept in evolutionary psychology is the idea of adaptive behavior. Adaptive behaviors are those that have evolved because they provided some survival or reproductive advantage in our ancestral environment. For example, early humans who were able to form strong social bonds were more likely to survive in groups, protect one another from predators, and share resources. As a result, humans have evolved complex social behaviors such as cooperation, empathy, and the ability to read social cues. These behaviors have allowed humans to form communities, build networks of support, and navigate social dynamics that are crucial for survival. One of the most significant evolutionary pressures that shaped human behavior is the need to secure resources and find a mate. In our ancestral past, the competition for food, shelter, and reproductive opportunities would have been fierce. Those who were able to effectively compete for these resources, whether through intelligence, physical strength, or social influence, were more likely to pass on their genes. This explains why many of the behaviors associated with human attraction and mating, such as seeking physical attractiveness or social status, can be understood from an evolutionary standpoint. For instance, mate selection in evolutionary psychology is often framed in terms of reproductive fitness. In ancient times, a mate's ability to provide resources, protect offspring, and demonstrate social status were all important indicators of their genetic quality and ability to contribute to the survival of future generations. Today, these traits may not be as relevant in a modern context, but they still influence human behavior. For example, studies show that people tend to gravitate toward partners who exhibit traits associated with fertility, health, and social standing, even if these factors are less important in the modern world. Another key area of human behavior shaped by evolutionary psychology is parenting and caregiving. The need to ensure the survival of offspring is one of the most powerful drivers of human behavior. In evolutionary terms, ensuring that children survive to adulthood is vital for passing on one's genetic legacy. This is why humans invest so heavily in parenting. Unlike many other species, human offspring require extensive care and nurturing for a prolonged period before they can fend for themselves. This extended period of dependency encourages strong emotional bonds between parents and children, as well as the development of behaviors that promote caregiving, such as empathy, protectiveness, and sacrifice. The concept of in-group and out-group dynamics is another key area of human behavior that is often examined through the lens of evolutionary psychology. Early human societies were small and often faced threats from rival groups. The ability to distinguish between members of one's own group, the in-group, and outsiders, the out-group, was crucial for survival. Members of the in-group were seen as allies, and cooperation was necessary to ensure survival, while members of the out-group were often viewed as competitors or threats. These behaviors likely evolved to promote social cohesion and group survival. Today, although our survival no longer depends on small group dynamics, these evolutionary instincts still influence behavior. This is evident in phenomena like in-group favoritism and out-group hostility, where people tend to favor members of their own social group while exhibiting prejudice or distrust toward those outside their group. Aggression is another area of human behavior that has been shaped by evolutionary pressures. In our ancestral past, aggression could have served as a useful strategy in a variety of contexts, defending resources, protecting oneself or one's family, or competing for mates. While aggression can be destructive in modern society, its roots can be traced back to our evolutionary history, where it was a mechanism for survival. However, evolutionary psychology also suggests that aggression is tempered by social and moral systems in modern humans, as cooperation and empathy often lead to greater long-term survival than aggression alone. Thus, aggression is regulated by social norms, which are learned and passed down through culture. The role of emotions in human behavior is also critical in evolutionary psychology. Emotions such as fear, anger, love, and jealousy have deep evolutionary roots. For example, fear is an adaptive emotion that helps individuals avoid dangerous situations, while anger can motivate individuals to defend themselves or their resources. Love and attachment, on the other hand, promote bonding between parents and children as well as between romantic partners. These emotions were essential for survival in the ancestral environment, and they continue to influence human behavior today, although they may manifest differently in contemporary contexts. Overall, evolutionary psychology provides a framework for understanding human behavior that goes beyond cultural and social influences. It underscores the idea that many of our behaviors are deeply rooted in the survival and reproductive challenges faced by our ancestors. Whether it is the way we select mates, cooperate with others, or experience emotions, evolutionary psychology suggests that these behaviors are not arbitrary but have evolved because they were adaptive in the context of human history. While modern life may have changed the specific challenges we face, the psychological mechanisms developed through evolutionary pressures remain a fundamental part of our behavior today. By understanding the evolutionary basis for human behavior, we gain insight into the deep-seated psychological forces that continue to shape our actions, desires, and interactions with others. In conclusion, the study of human behavior through the lens of evolutionary psychology offers valuable insights into the complexities of human nature. From the way we form relationships and select mates to how we express emotions and navigate social dynamics, many of our behaviors are deeply rooted in the survival and reproductive challenges faced by our ancestors. Evolutionary psychology helps us understand that the instincts and psychological mechanisms that guide our actions were shaped over millennia to increase our chances of survival and successful reproduction. While modern society has introduced new contexts and challenges, these ancient psychological traits continue to influence our decisions, interactions, and emotional experiences. By recognizing the interplay between our evolutionary past and present behavior, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us, ultimately fostering greater self-awareness, empathy, and emotional intelligence in our relationships and daily lives.